Hi, welcome back to episode 13. And this podcast today is going to be shared with a inspiration and a wonderful source of encouragement on the internet for women who are looking to connect truly and authentically with their power in the world. And I have come across this beautiful soul probably 5 years ago now, and have just been so thankful for her presence in the world and the continual energy that she's bringing to the realm of the female and understanding our bodies, especially around pregnancy and conception and postpartum care. And so, anyway, welcome to the podcast, Anissa. I am really excited to have you here, and I would love for you to give a little introduction about yourself and what brought you to the journey that you are on.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. And I have arrived at this, really, I think a calling of serving women on their motherhood journey, and really had my own journey arriving here. I would say it began initially when I joined. I went to Bastyr University, which is a school for natural medicine, and I went there to study nutrition as a vegetarian, thinking that I was going to heal everyone with a vegetarian diet. And ironically, I arrived there and realized, because a lot of times when we are not in a great state of health, we often don't realize it until we are shown what normal looks like. So I realized that I was actually at rock bottom in my own health. And I was chronically fatigued. I had debilitating period pain. I was passing out often. I mean, my hair was falling out. I was super bloated. Like, name the symptom, I had it. My mood was, super low. And um and it wasn't until I met my husband, who was in school to become a naturopathic doctor at the time, and he started reflecting back to me many of the symptoms that I was experiencing. And not like he was trying to diagnose me or anything, but he was just saying, like, hey, this isn't normal. Like, you shouldn't be, like, on your period being completely just in so much pain, right? Like, I would be curled up in a ball crying, like, from the pain of my menstruation. And like, right now I'm on day 2 of my period and I'm fine. You know what I mean? Like, and um so it's like, it was really he who shed a light on many of the ways that I was normalizing the way that I was feeling. And I had actually, even before meeting him, I had started seeing some doctors because there were some signs that had stood out to me as not normal, right? Like, I was tired all the time and I was fainting. I actually really injured my knee badly one time when I fainted, and that was kind of what initiated me seeking out medical care, because growing up I never really went to the doctor, and I never really had a regular doctor who I would see. And so it was kind of just like this, okay, I guess I'm going to find a doctor who's going to help me. Um, because I really shouldn't be fainting on a regular basis. And so most of the doctors who I had tried to work with really, like, they gaslit me in the sense that, like, they looked at me and they saw that I was thin, I was athletic, and I was young. And so they said, "Oh, you're young, you're healthy, you're fine." And I would kind of just tell them, like, I shouldn't be fainting. Like, I should have more energy. Like, I shouldn't be falling asleep in my classes. Like, something is keeping me from thriving, right? But that was the extent of the problems that I thought, right? I didn't think the period problems were an issue, or the digestive problems, the mood problems, like, all of those things were reflections of my, like, inner imbalances. And so yeah, I had explored working with different providers and really was just told, like, oh, it's normal, like, what you're going through, you'll grow out of it, type of thing. And so then it was really the period pain that kind of led my husband to saying like, hey, like there's really something that you should address here. And, fast track a little bit through our relationship, there was one turning point when it came to changing my diet when um, we had this conversation and we were actually at a restaurant and I had a bite of his meal. He had this like lamb curry and I had a bite of the rice that was soaked with the lamb curry. And I told him, I said, there's this flavor here that I just can't pinpoint, but like my bones are craving it. Like I was like, I'm craving it to my bones and I don't know what this feeling is. And he was like, oh, it's a lamb, it's a lamb curry. I was like, lamb, that's the flavor. Because I'm of Persian heritage. My mom is from Iran. And lamb is like the number one meat that we eat there. And it was a flavor I had as a child, but like when I decided to go vegetarian as a young teenager, totally forgot about, right? And so I taste this. I was like, what is this? Like my body is like, giving this food a like a hug. I need more of this. And so that was one of the things that kind of led my husband to just like throwing it out there like, hey, it sounds to me like you're not in a great place in your health. Your body is telling you that you want to eat more meat. What would happen if you just try to introduce it and did like a 30-day challenge and saying like, hey, what's going to happen, right? Like what's the worst that could happen, really? Because I had hit rock bottom and I was like, you know what? You're right. Like there isn't that much worse that could happen. The worst is that I have to like swallow my pride, right? Because if going into studying nutrition, and especially when you follow like a, trendy diet or whatever, many people identify with the diet that they're following. And I definitely did, right? I was like, oh, like the vegetarian diet, plant-based diet's going to be like what's going to heal the world and all of this kind of stuff. And so I really had to swallow my pride and be like, okay, well, if I'm studying nutrition and I'm going to be going in and actually like guiding people in what they're going to eat, like I have to be willing to, go against what I believe and see, is it really true? Like, is what I believe really the best diet for my body? And so I was like, okay, I'll challenge it. And, in that 30 days, I would say in the first week, it became very clear that I was not going back to eating a vegetarian diet. And it was really because I just had so much more energy, like energy that I wish I had in high school, right? Like I was a very competitive athlete and I was overtraining for the amount that I was eating, right? There was no level of nutrition that I could get from solely plant foods that was going to properly fuel my competition. But I have great genetics and was still able to perform pretty well. But I wish I had that level of energy and that amount of nutrition back then. And so probably within a few months of eating more meat, I gained like 5 pounds of muscle. I was at this point where I would work out, but I wouldn't gain any muscle. And, I would get somewhat stronger, but I had definitely plateaued. And for a while I hadn't even been working out much because I didn't have the energy to, right? And so I was finally like, if you imagine my body as this completely depleted, empty cup, I was finally like filling my cup and nourishing myself, replenishing those nutrients. And I just became so vital. And, I had energy, I had libido like that I had never experienced before. I started experiencing good signs of fertility, right? Like cervical mucus is one healthy sign of fertility. And I never witnessed that before until I started eating animal foods again. And so it was really just such a transformative shift that led me down this whole path of realizing just how many people even if they eat animal foods, how many people are under eating, animal foods, whether it's eggs, dairy, meat, seafood, whatever, organ meats. And I did a complete 180, right? Like I dove right into like making liver pate, bone broth, like, all the things, and really having a very animal based diet at the time. And yeah. And so then what led me then from that into supporting women, on our journeys into motherhood was that part of it was selfish in the sense that like I knew I wanted to have my own children and I wanted to make sure that I was optimally preparing myself for motherhood. And so at the same time, like I knew just based on my own schooling, like how important preconception preparation is. And so that was when I was just really diving into everything pregnancy nutrition, everything that traditional cultures would do. And then really just trying to make sure like I'm a little bit of a perfectionist at heart. And so there was definitely a big part of me that was like, I want to do this perfectly. And there's in some ways I was like way over prepared in ways that like are completely unnecessary, especially when it like came to birth. But as for like preconception preparation, I really nailed down like, okay, what's going to be like the optimal preconception diet? What exactly do I need to do to prepare myself? Where do I need to get my hormones? What do my fertility signs need to look like? Because for me, there was a big part of me that had this fear for like, I mean, in some ways it was unsubstantiated. Like it's like my mom was 40 when she had me and she got pregnant the first time, right? Like there's no history of infertility in my family, but I was aware of the drastic rise statistically in our modern society of infertility. And so for me, there was this fear that maybe I wasn't going to be able to get pregnant, especially because I had struggled with my hormones before. And so I was like, I want to do everything in my power to set myself up for success. That way, when we start trying to conceive, then it's, I know that I've done everything that I can, to optimize my chances, because I knew that I didn't want to deal with the potential heartbreak of struggling to conceive or, losing a pregnancy that could have been prevented, right? Like that's not to say that all pregnancy losses are preventable. Many of them are out of our hands, but there are very many preventable types of pregnancy losses as well. And so those were things I was essentially trying to save myself the heartbreak of going through those experiences that of course I would grow from if I had them, but ones that I didn't want to put myself through. And sure enough, with both of my pregnancies, I conceived on the first time. It was so, I can't describe the level of like joy and gratitude that I experienced when I did conceive the first time with both children, because like it really confirmed to me like this works, like when you nourish, like I always think about things in relation to nature, like when you amend the soil, right? And you create the perfect environment for my particular plant, my particular seed that I want to plant, then it's going to work, right? Like humans are designed to be reproducing, and it really takes setting up the right environment for that to happen. I wish everybody was like a dandelion and they could grow in any environment. There are some people who can get pregnant regardless of what they're doing. But, I'm more of a dahlia, where like I need a lot of water and I need that sunshine. And, I have one dahlia that I planted on the backside of my water tank, and it just like doesn't get the right amount of sunshine. And it's just a sprout of leaves, like whereas the other ones are just tall and blooming, and that one wasn't planted in the right place, right? And so thinking about how do we set up our own internal environment to be appropriate for inviting in a new human, a new spirit, and so that was really the approach that I had going into my like mothering experience. And then this was happening concurrently with my work as a nutritionist, right? I had graduated college, I did my graduate degree. I had been in practice for several years before we started trying to conceive. And throughout those years where I was working at this integrative clinic, I was working with predominantly women. And I noticed that regardless of what stage of life these women were in, all signs pointed towards like the earlier you make change, the better, particularly as it related to like hormones, fertility, and pregnancy. And so, like, for example, I would work with a woman who had like, what I would say was like an unnecessary C-section and was like digging into her story. And like, there were so many red flags that pointed towards like, oh, like these things could have changed and that outcome wouldn't have happened. Or, a woman with PCOS who is struggling to get pregnant, um, looking towards, okay, like, well, if we just focused on balancing your hormones instead of your doctor just putting you on birth control, like for years, for a decade, like maybe we could actually get to the root cause and help you get pregnant, right? So there was like different scenarios that would come up. And all signs pointed towards balancing hormones in preparation for pregnancy could have prevented so many unnecessary complications later on, right? I would have clients with gestational diabetes who I would be helping, and that can very much be prevented, prior to pregnancy. And so one of the things that really stood out to me so much was that many women felt victim to their situation, and they also felt like they have no role in it. And in no way do I want to blame women for the outcomes that they experience, but I also want to point towards the power that we have to prevent those, negative outcomes from happening. Because the worst thing is when a woman says like, I would love to have a home birth, but then I had an emergency C-section because X, Y, and Z happened that was 100% preventable. Or, and so like, I want to support women so that they can then manifest their own dreams and so that they can manifest their physiological like trajectory of motherhood, right? Like women who aren't able to breastfeed because their thyroid is out of balance, right? Like there's so many things that can happen. These are all just different examples that come to mind. But so many preventable ways that like women can really optimize their journey into motherhood and to not experience the complications that are so widely known that for mothers to experience throughout this time.
Yeah, I super love and appreciate all that, and specifically your personal journey through navigating like what you were comfortable with in your body, and you mentioned your pride as something that had to be swallowed in order to look at the full picture of what was actually happening for you. And I think that your journey is perfect in that it brought you to bring this, like you said, this ability for other women, like to be called into a space where they can then flourish as individuals in their bodies. And I feel like that is so lacking, like if you want to disempower, can start with the woman and you can take all of her power from her by telling her she doesn't understand her body and she doesn't know any signs, and the things that she is feeling are, like you said, they're gaslighting. She's totally fine. Whether you're feeling this or not, there's nothing wrong with you. Like leave our office, you're fine. And so I feel like this is just such really, really, really important work that you are doing. Help women to see that they do have immense power over their physiology and the way that it feels to live inside of it. Because we have, there's many different lives that one can lead and live. And personally, as a female in my little body, I would love to have a robust and abundant life. I would love to be able to nurture and nourish the future. I am part of a continuum. And my part of that puzzle is to be nourishing and nurturing, to the space that I have, the lineage that I am responsible for right now. Hopefully my grandchildren also understand that, but right now I'm part of that sacred continuum of life. And if I am not taking care of it like it is a sacred role, then I'm missing something. I'm missing a piece of what the ancestors hoped I had. But
Mm-hmm.
I just really, really love everything that you talked about. And I want to highlight too about how, so much of the things surrounding pregnancy, postpartum, and birth, like things that people feel like they need medical help for, is largely preventable. If anybody listening is totally new to Nisa, you can go to her website and read her blogs about her births, and even her pregnancy journeys. And they're very, very maybe eye-opening and enriching to think about the possibility of somebody having the experiences that she did. And the truth is she's not alone. There's many other women who are having these same wonderful, impactful to their whole trajectory as a female life.
Yes, I do share about my birth stories. I had a midwife attended home birth with my first child, and I had a wild pregnancy and sovereign birth with my second child. So essentially, I didn't have any healthcare provider present during my second birth. And although both were home births, and even though after my first birth, I would have said it was quote unquote perfect, having then compared it to my second birth, they were wildly different. And birthing on my own terms without somebody up in my business telling me what to do was life changing and such a sacred spiritual experience to be able to invite that and really claim that for myself, right? Because it took a lot of going against the grain, going against the mainstream, and claiming that safe space for me to be able to have the birth that I deserved and that we all deserve. Um, and much of it was about not inviting people who didn't belong there. And yeah, I mean, some people were like, "Oh, but your husband was there, so at least you had a doctor there." And I was like, "He was not in his doctor role." like the only thing he contributed other than his like safe presence and his like, he has a very like warrior protector nature. Um and so he was there in presence. The only other thing he did was he caught the baby because I told him to. um and so I was in this position where my back was fully extended and my arms were down on, I was kind of sitting on these two chairs with a gap in between. And I was just like leaning back and because I was carrying my body weight on my hands behind me, of course, like I didn't want the baby flying out and landing on the floor. And so, I told him to catch the baby. But to have a sovereign birth where a woman is fully, making all of her decisions with her own autonomy, with her own vision throughout, like all the way from fertility management through conception, through pregnancy, through birth, through postpartum, like it's so normal and also so different from the stories that I hear women experiencing and the experiences that I hear about that are just so intertwined with trauma and, other people's involvement that shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, I'm actually really surprised that, well, I'm not, but it's so surprising to me that there are still so many women that are in the disempowerment space that have absolutely no idea that they have power and autonomy, especially in the realm of birth, pregnancy, conception, postpartum,
Mm-hmm.
the whole spectrum there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because we really actually have like so much power. And one of the things that you were sharing about too was just, things like preeclampsia and other things are totally preventable. And if we look at like the work of Weston A. Price and whatnot, there's other things, even like the placenta health and other things that are 100% preventable and adjustable, and like you said, the earlier you catch it, the faster you start to invest into your personal being and build up the basic understanding within yourself of the power that you actually hold and carry. The like that is exponentiated in your future. Like it's not, I mean, yeah, it's maybe feel like drudgery, like, oh, I got to get 100 grams of protein in and this is exhausting and blah, blah, blah. But the exponential impact it has to your future is mind blowing, when we become aware of it and just sit and process like the depth of like almost reciprocity and gratitude that our body returns to us for simply nourishing it is so powerful. And it's just something that I'm always amazed by because we're so, like, every cell of our being has such incredible wisdom. And to lean into that truth and to trust it and to awaken to it and grapple with it and feel through it, I think as a woman is like one of the greatest things that we can do. And whether that happens, in birth, which for most women it does, if they become aware of it at all, it happens at some point in their, becoming a mother journey. But hopefully it happens before that, because if it does, well, then your child and your offspring is then impacted for life in a very positive way that, if you look at the work of like Lily Nichols, and there's plenty of people that talk about how nutrition is so impactful for the child's long-term health. And if you are doing your work before you conceive and you do it faithfully through, pregnancy and postpartum when you're nursing, your child's health is set up for an abundant life, for their whole life. So many of the markers for all the things that we have concerns about, like diseases and cancers and things, totally disappear. They're gone. They don't even exist. And other things, like just like dealing with the constant, like, oh, my child has a runny nose this week, I can't go anywhere, it's not a thing that you deal with because, for so much of the work that you put in, you now have a very robust offspring because you set yourself up beforehand. And so that's all your work is helping women to be set up for a robust future and offspring as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think is probably one of the biggest mistakes I see women making is waiting until they are in it and dealing with a challenge or complication and then seeking out help, right? You brought up preeclampsia. That often happens later in pregnancy, and the root causes are addressed or are becoming, you know, evident, often not to, to the woman herself, but evident to her physiology much earlier than that. First trimester, even preconception, especially, one of the things you brought up, Lily Nichols as well. I interviewed her on my podcast, the Resilient Fertility Podcast. And one of the things we talked about was the role of male fertility in the outcomes of preeclampsia. And so that's male fertility is often something that is not talked about enough as it relates to women's pregnancy outcomes. Because I think a lot of times we just think, logically or theoretically that like, oh, like the man just provides his sperm, like as if it's just a donation and then we do all the work, which like, yes, we do carry the pregnancy, we do birth the baby, but like the genetics, like the blueprint of what's going to create the embryo, what's going to create the fetus, what's going to create the placenta, what's going to help the baby grow, like 50% of that comes from the man.
Yeah, and in some aspects of the way the genetics play out, it can be 70-30, 80-20, different ratios pulling in different aspects of the way the child development happens within utero and even after birth,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I love that you brought that up because male fertility is so important. And so, like from my perspective, when I think of like, yes, women need to be on this journey, we really also need to, and this is why it really needs to happen before we try to conceive, is because we need to be bringing in our partners as well to
Mm-hmm.
this truth of our biology. It's just the truth of our biology, and you're not going to get away from it.
I have this client right now who she just got engaged, and she's been working with me before she got engaged. And, she's been in this place where she's on the later end of her reproductive era, and had been really worried about that. And like, will I meet the right person? And all of this. And thankfully she's been, making some big changes. And now, like, as soon as they get married, they're going to start trying to conceive. Um, but she said, I'm gonna ask him, or what did she say? She said, I asked him to go through your course too, my course, Resilient Motherhood, and I want to make sure that he's doing the changes that he needs to make beforehand as well. And one of the things that he responded with was, "Oh, I have plenty of swimmers. I'm not worried about it." And I think that's a very common misconception as well for like men's perception of their fertility is that all you need is just one to get pregnant, which, yes, you do need just one. But even if you have plenty of swimmers, there can be a very, very high percentage of them. And the majority of men's swimmers are abnormal. And so it's really a matter of like increasing the percentage of normal sperm and reducing, what we call oxidative damage, essentially centralized inflammation that's going to um, mutate the DNA within the sperm. And so that's something that I make very clear, like in the first lesson of my course, is like, this is a 50-50 effort, preconception preparation. Resilient motherhood is directed towards women because we are the women seeking out care and also taking on the responsibility, right? So yeah, so it's been really wonderful hearing. I would say the majority of the women who have gone through my course, they have had really supportive husbands, and going through and making the changes too, and even like going so far as to like request the meal plan recipes so that they can do the meal prep, so that their women aren't taking on everything on their shoulders. And so it's been really wonderful to see all the different ways that that the men are just taking on equal responsibility. But there's also been others where the men have not been wanting to make any changes, or maybe they will make changes, but it comes with a lot of resistance of like, like I really have to stop drinking my daily beer, or like I really, and it's kind of shocking to me sometimes, because I'll see the woman who's like taking every step possible to optimize her chances and her fertility, and the men are sometimes, not all of them, but there definitely are some men who it's like you're just forcing them to have to make a single change, or to have him go to bed at a decent time, right? Like you can't go to bed at 2 a.m. every night, right? Like it's going to destroy your sperm. and and so like I often find like I'm recommending like the very least amount of things for some of the men, and like the women are like trying to like carry, carry on the rest of the responsibility. So it's challenging. I actually have a podcast episode that I forget exactly what it was called, but it was essentially identifying like red flags in men before you get married that will help you prevent challenges when it comes to starting a family. And, those are some of the things, is like, how willing is he um, to improve himself? Like, is he open? Is he receptive to receiving critique? Or, does he have a growth mindset? Or is he stuck in his ways and thinks that he's the best? And, all of that kind of stuff, right? I hope that the women who are attracted to my work are finding the men that they deserve. But, you know, they don't always. And so, or sometimes things happen and they make a decision, they might accidentally get pregnant, and it wasn't their intention. So I know things happen. But I think the more that we can go into this decision of starting a family with the most intention, the outcomes are life-changing for us in our experience of motherhood, for our partners, for our children. And yeah, that's a really important piece, I think, when it comes to like being ready to start a family and become a mother, is like making sure that you've married the right person, and that it is right. And sometimes that can feel so difficult, especially for a woman who's like, on the later end of her fertility. And I have another client right now who, she's 44 and she's with a man who she knows isn't going to be the best father. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I'm not telling her that the clock is ticking. She knows the clock is ticking, but I'm like, you're doing this because you don't want to hurt his feelings. Like, right now, his feelings are not the priority if you really want to have a baby. You just have to make a decision and move on. Sometimes I'm a little too frank with my clients.
Well, I think that is needed for a lot of women, is to like, hey, look, I see the best for you. See it for yourself and take action. Because, I mean, the future is just waiting for us to start taking the action that we should be as a species.
There's this quote, and it's a Baha'i quote, and it says something along the lines of, walk a mystical path with practical feet. And I feel like that's a quote that really guides a lot of my action, and like my dedication to health and self-improvement and growth, because we can still walk this mystical path, right? Like trusting in the divine, trusting in, God's will. And then at the same time, walking it with practical feet, right? Taking the necessary action, you taking strategic steps, intentional steps that are going to help manifest God's will. And so that's something I think about a lot, especially as it relates to this whole topic, because we can trust in God's will. At the same time, we are needed in helping to manifest that.
Yeah, it's a huge piece of the puzzle, is to actually take action. Absolutely. I agree 100%. And I couldn't agree more with the fact that the most important piece in creating offspring is that the two people aligning to bring the third person through to the earth space are in alignment and in agreement. And if you don't have a partner who is agreeing with you on, ways to basically, like the basics of taking care of your biology, which aren't as crazy as maybe mainstream culture wants to present. They're just totally ancient, and they're very, once you, embrace them, they're extremely natural, and you feel like 1,000% better doing them. So it's just like trusting, like for me, it's like help, like the vision is to get people to lean in to like the truth that is there, and to trust it, to walk those practical steps to then manifest, with the divine. So yeah, I really like that. I want to let you share a little bit about your course, Resilient Motherhood.
So Resilient Motherhood is really like a guide, a strategic guide that has step-by-step actions that you can take to get in tune with your own female physiology. I teach about the entire menstrual cycle from an energetic perspective, from a hormonal perspective. I go through every phase and how we can change our diet, our activity, our actions, our habits throughout every phase of the cycle. And then I also identify what is normal, like what does a normal female physiology look like, right? Because like I mentioned earlier in the episode, I didn't understand what normal was as it related to my cycle, right? I expected that period cramps were normal, right? That PMS was normal, bloating was normal. And so most people don't know what true normal is. So I kind of provide this like general standard. Of course, there's like flexibility within normal, there's a range of normal. But to allow women to then envision this and then to be able to identify for themselves, oh, here's where things may need a little bit of improvement. And so I address many of the common like red flags, as it relates to our physiology. But I'll just list a couple of the examples right now. For example, some areas where assistance and support may be needed is if like you're experiencing heavy or light periods. If you have painful periods, if you experience PMS or, anxiety or depression before your period comes, if you're experiencing breast tenderness before your period comes, this might be a little bit of a controversial statement because I think most women assume that we should be mean people before our period comes. There's all these memes about it, like that, like, how dare you talk to me during my luteal phase, or, like that type of thing. But like, I wouldn't know my period would be starting unless I was like charting my cycle, right? Like I know on luteal day, luteal day 14, or like 14 days past ovulation, my period's going to come. Like I know I have a 14-day luteal phase. My period's going to come. That's how I know. I don't know that my period's going to come because I'm anxious, because I'm not sleeping, because my breasts are tender, because I'm bloated, like all of those symptoms that have become normalized for women to know that their period is coming are actually signs of hormonal imbalance. Like another sign for me that I had been experiencing was really low basal body temperatures. Like my basal body temperatures were in the 95-degree, 96-degree range, like Fahrenheit, pre-ovulatory. And like after ovulation, my temperatures would rarely go even into the 97s. Now they're like halfway through the 98s after ovulation, right? And they're always in the 97s pre-ovulation, right? That's a very simple, like, biofeedback measurement that you can check, as it relates to checking on your own, like, hormonal wellness. It can relate back to thyroid health. It can relate back to protein consumption, metabolic health. And so, yeah, so I would just say, like, take a look at your overall wellness, right? Like, is your hair staying on your head? Does your skin glow, right? Do you have a high libido, especially around ovulation? Do you have enough energy to get you through the day and enough energy to like work out and, meal prep and cook dinner at the end of the day, right? Like you don't necessarily want to pass out at the end of every day. Like of course there's room for fluctuation and variation, right? Like I do rest more while I'm on my period, but it's not that I'm completely out of it, right? And so those are just a couple of things to highlight. But coming back to how I then address these in the course is then I then provide like common root causes of many of these different symptoms that people can be experiencing, signs and symptoms that people can experience, so that they can then identify for themselves what are the steps that may need to be taken to then bring their bodies back into balance. And then I go through, like how to track your fertility signs, how to use those as biofeedback information. Um, and then I dive into foundational um, systems to address in preparation for motherhood, right? And for pregnancy, but really getting to the root of like how to bring your hormones into optimal balance, how to bring your nutrition, your nutrient status and mineral status back into balance. And the thing is that not everybody's going to need exactly the same change, right? Like I brought the analogy in about plants earlier. We all need a different internal environment, right? To welcome in conception. But all of our systems have to be optimized, right? Our blood sugar has to be balanced. Our digestion needs to be optimized. Our livers need to be detoxifying effectively. Our nutrition has to be replete. And so there's all of these different stages that are foundational systems. Our nervous system has to be communicating effectively to our womb space, right? Like that all needs to be set in stone, right? Like what it takes to balance your blood sugar is going to look differently person to person. But the fact that your blood sugar needs to be stable is across the board important, regardless of whether you have had recurrent miscarriages or whether you've had PCOS or endometriosis or no hormone imbalances at all, right? Like the fact that, regardless of where your hormone health is, we all need to have healthy, stable blood sugar in preparation for a healthy pregnancy. Bottom line, and all of those things together, right? The detox, the nervous system regulation, all of those things. And so I have like many lessons kind of going through all of those different stages and how to support your body to bring those back into balance. And then I get into the food, like what are the foods that are going to be nourishing your body, that are going to help bring your body back into balance. I have, lots of meal plans, a recipe collection, utilizing many recipes from my own like Persian heritage that I've kind of modified with my own personal flair, adding some organ meats to some of them, or just other like cultural cuisines, right? I've done a lot of traveling, and I find I consider myself pretty culturally literate, and love all different types of cuisine. So one of the things that I want people to know is that, addressing your preconception diet does not have to be boring, and it does not have to be like in any way depriving. Really, it should be an abundant, an abundant diet full of lots of nourishing whole foods and lots of spices and lots of seasonal fruits and things like that. And so, if people are going on a like fertility cleanse or diet and feeling like they're depriving themselves, they're doing it wrong. Because you should feel like you're in a state of abundance, both like at a cellular level, but also on an emotional level. And so that's really my goal with like the meal plans and the recipes that I provide within Resilient Motherhood. And I've received a lot of great feedback, from the people who have used them. And then I go in through, some of the more like lifestyle habits that are going to be helping people to bring their bodies back into balance. And I go through helping women develop a resilient motherhood mindset. So essentially, like, what's the mindset that they need to go into pregnancy with? Like, how do they go into it with confidence? How do they make decisions, in their integrity? So there's a lot of the kind of the mindset piece as well. So essentially what I've done is I've taken all of my, I've been in practice now for 9 years, my 9 years of experience working with women throughout supporting them through their motherhood journeys, and addressing all of the foundational steps that I've found myself, either talking with all of my one-on-one clients with, or wishing I talked to them with because we didn't have enough time. And so really laying all of these things out in a step-by-step way so that women can prepare for pregnancy. And really, I highly recommend doing this, preconception preparation course within 2 years of getting pregnant, right? It can never be too soon, right? Especially like maybe you haven't met the person yet. Like I just mentioned, I have a client who was trying to prepare her body so that she was ready when she did get engaged. Um, but I think what I find to be the case is that when you start to adopt many of the resilient motherhood strategies, what I teach in resilient motherhood, you become more of the person that attracts the kind of man you want to be married to and make babies with.
Yes, this is 100% accurate. When you begin doing the work, you are no longer attracted to those who aren't, and you don't waste your time. You just don't have space for it. So, yes, that's a huge piece for sure.
Yeah. So I highly recommend women to start as early as pre-marriage or pre-babies, and then really giving a bare minimum of 3 months of preparation. The research shows that a year of preparation is really ideal. Because it's more like a lot of times people will address like the first 3 months before conception, because that's like when the egg follicle is going through its final maturation process. But there really is so much more development that's happening earlier than that. And so I think a year of preconception preparation is ideal, but bare minimum 3 months when it comes to like timing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that specifically with preconception work, I feel like we should be starting as early, like as soon as we are bleeding as women. And we should be so of abundance that by the time we are ready to actually receive a seed that we want to grow, that there is no question about our health at all. We are just so abundant with life because that is what we're supposed to be. So yeah, I think so. I mean I agree too. I feel like the three months before is, like you said, the bare minimum. The earlier the better. There's no question about it. And if we want to be creating nurtured life, then we have to start earlier and stop outsourcing so much of the journey, because really we're the only ones that have the power to take that journey. So thank you for sharing about resilient motherhood. And I know you mentioned your podcast as well. It is Resilient Fertility. Is that correct? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I'm actually really happy that you've hit the online business because it gives you such a greater reach, But
I will just mention that like you mentioned my website is anisawoodall.com. So for those who are wondering, we're mentioning it, but it's just my name. So anisawoodall.com.
Yes, thank you for saying that. Your podcast can be found on every platform. Is that correct?
Yeah. I have it hosted on Spotify, but you can hear it on Apple Music and Pocket Casts and all the other things.
Yeah. Perfect. So Resilient Motherhood is on your website. You can check out the podcast on any of your podcast listening hubs. And Anisa, I am just so thankful for your work. If I had not come across you, not have had such a wonderful, well, I wouldn't have built the relationship that I have now with my body for sure. I don't talk about it a lot on my podcast, and maybe some of the people in my space know, but years and years ago when I got married, I was diagnosed with PCOS, and we saw fertility specialists and other things, and I had cyst removals, and I thought for a while that I wasn't going to conceive, after 5 years of marriage. And after some really basic things of cleansing my space and cleansing my body and becoming more in tune with the essence and energy of the female, I was able to have 2 really beautiful births that didn't require fuss and fiddle in the middle of them. And same for postpartum. I nursed my oldest till 5, and I'm still nursing my youngest, and it's been a really beautiful journey into motherhood. And I know that there are so many women who do not have that experience. And Like I said, if I hadn't found your work, I don't think that I would have had the same journey that I did. So I'm really, really thankful for your work in the world. And so, yeah, so even though I have been over here in the periphery and you've not really known anything about me, I have been so nourished by your work. So thank you.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm thankful that you've had those positive experiences. And now you and your children are going to go out into the world and continue to touch more lives and help women understand that that is within their reach. And that's my goal too.
Yeah, 100%. Totally within our reach. So thank you for being here. I'm going to close out now, I think, with a song for us. And leaning into the abundance of our being. Leaning into the truth of who we are. Trusting the flow, trusting the energy, trusting the seasons as they change. Listening for the movements, listening for the wisdom, trusting your perfect timing. Lean into the wisdom of your being, here and now.